Want to make something cool? How about a D20 Dice Bag? So this is a pretty stitch heavy project, very little hardware, couple eyelets if you want, otherwise you don't have to worry about it. It's all a box stitch. You can do the X stitches on the outside, or you can do them on the inside to where you end up with a nice cross stitch. In the files that I've included, there are two different versions of the SVG files if you want a laser cut. One of them will leave this space blank so you can put your maker's mark on there if you want. The other does include the one. Everything you need is included in the pattern. The large bag will hold a little over 6 sets of dice, and then we have a small version. This is the one we're going to make in the video, and this will hold just over 2 sets of dice. You can use leather lace, you can use paracord, whatever you want to clamp these up. Knots at the end, or you can even put on a little clamp. On the paracord, I like to use the little toggles. Let's dive in though. Your pattern is going to have both sizes included. Your small, your large, and then most importantly, you're going to have layouts for what numbers go together. And we'll get into that later. Everything you need. Let's get started. So this happens to be a great pattern if you're doing it by hand for scrap leather. By the time you get all of these cut out, you'll be able to see that they don't take up much leather individually, and so it works out really well to use up all of those odd shapes that you end up having in your leather left over after you've done another project. Now you do want to make sure to use the same hide. Don't do this where one hide is 2 ounces and another hide is 6 ounces or 4 ounces. You'll end up with a wonky bag if it's not all the same weight. But you can see you end up with a leftover piece like this after you get done doing something else, and you can fit several of these in here around any of your blemishes. You've got all this over here we'll be able to fit some in, as well as some other scrap I have. Very good utilization for stuff like this that often would get tossed or used for just die tests or stamping tests or things like that. You can actually turn it into a usable project. Now normally with these bags, I'm fortunate, I have a laser, and so I do like to use my laser for cutting these out. I can have the holes done, the numbers etched, everything all in one go. But you don't have to have a laser to do this project, so I figured I would do this one by hand. Just to kind of show you what we're looking at. When it comes to the numbers themselves, we have a few options. We can use a stamp set and just stamp the number in. We can hand engrave them using like a swivel knife and stamping. We can paint them. If you don't want to stamp them at all, you can just paint them directly on. Whatever your skill set is, play into that and use your strength for however you want it to turn out. For this one, I think we're going to try using a stamp set because I actually haven't done that yet. And we'll see how it turns out together. But there's the pattern all cut out. Now we just got to get it taped down to everything. All right. So we've got all of this just on a few 4 pieces of odd scrap that I had. Again, excellent project, especially for the smaller bag. Now on the smaller bag, the numbers are smaller. So if you're wanting to carve those, it's a little more difficult, but take your time and you can. We'll do one example of that to show you. But for now, let's go ahead and get these punched out. If you're going to stamp them, it really doesn't matter what triangle is what at this point. You can put pretty much whatever number you want on it. You just need to remember which ones are going to go for the enclosure that have the eyelet in them for the tie. And we'll get back to that. But at this point, get it punched like that. Come in, again, you can use your razor or your shears I'm just going to go ahead and do this real quick. And there we go. Now, like I said, this triangle does not technically have to be 9. It can be anything as long as it's not 16 or 14, one of the ones that's going to end up having the eyelet in it. If we're stamping it, because then we can just take a stamp and hit it with whatever number and we're set. If you're wanting to carve it, so let's take a look at that as an example real quick. So I got one extra one. What I would recommend is go ahead and punch your holes. We're going to go ahead and cut it still. Okay, now wet this slightly. You're going to want to end up getting it wet to carve anyway. Just got a little mister bottle. Hit that. We're going to let that sit for a minute. While I let that dry, I'm going to go ahead and get some of these other ones. But once it's dried out a little bit, we'll be able to trace that number back on it. Okay, if we look at that, that's pretty much back to our regular color. So what we can do is just set that guy back on top, and we're just going to take a pencil and trace that number. Just push down a little bit. And so now we've just got an imprint of that one. So if you've got a swivel knife, you can come in and carve that in. Now, like I said, that's pretty tiny. If we're wanting to end up beveling that out too, you're going to have to use a real small bevel to try to get in there and make an impression. So not the way that I would normally recommend going with the small bags, but if you're careful, it sure can be done. So you can get your imprint just like that, put a little paint on that after we dye it, and you'll be set to go. Takes a lot of patience, a lot of time, but it is possible. The option that, like I said, I think we're going to go with today, and I've never done it before, is we're going to try stamping it and see how that turns out. I think that's going to be a better avenue if you've got a set of letter stamps. So let me go ahead and punch and cut the rest of these out, and we'll get to that. Okay, so we've got all of these cut and punched out now. These are 1/4-inch holes, by the way. You can use a 1/4-inch punch. That's where an eyelet's going to go in, 1/4-inch eyelet, which will make the drawstrings that we'll use to pull the bag together when it's done. So now we're going to go ahead and try stamping. I've got a brand new set of stamps I haven't tried yet, so we'll see how they work together. For the most part, any of these guys, you can stamp the number in any orientation because they're all the same around. You can turn it whichever way you need. These ones, you want to try to match what was actually on the sticker. And the reason for that is to be inaccurate as the dice. So if you weren't aware, on a D20, there is a specific order of numbers, and it's that the opposites always equal 21. So if we got 20 on this side, if we flip it over, we'll have 1. If we have 7 here and we flip it over, we'll have 14. In order for that to work out, there's a specific order that they go in, and there's usually a specific orientation of how the numbers look too. put it together however you want. But if you want to match the die, then you can follow the pattern that I've got. The layout sheet will show you exactly what orientation and direction the numbers need to lay in order for it to match up to a D20 perfectly. So we're going to go ahead and case our leather. And in this case, this leather is super thin. So we don't want to get it too wet. We want to be able to get that water in and let it kind of dry out back to the normal color. So I've got a spray bottle here. This is actually used as like a mister for hair, but it works perfect for something like this. So we're just going to go ahead and mist that down. It doesn't take much, and you can see the difference in color for these leather. Now I went ahead and did these here that we're getting ready to stamp, but I wanted you to see it'll lighten back up to this color from this. So let's go ahead and get this down. And so if we look at the 8, the orientation that we want it is going to be this direction. Excuse me. So we're going to use the 2 dots in the very center of the stitching here to line up for our center. We're going to set it right there. Give that a couple taps. Let's go just a little heavier. There we go. And so there's our 8 that matches with our sticker. We're going to have, let's see here, a 6, a 16, a 14, and a 20. Let's go ahead and do our 6 next. Another single number. And so our piece is going to sit this way, and our 6 is going to go straight up and down. Let me see if I can move you guys here. Hold on just a second. All right, let's see if this works a little better for you to see what's going on. And so we can come right in here. And there's our 6. So now we're going to get into double digits, which we actually need to do a 16. And so let's see what the best way to space this, if there's a, they're both not going to fit on there, so we're going to have to wing this. Let's see what we can do. I'm going to go fairly close to that hole to get our 1. Overlap that just a little bit to get our 6. Let's get that back portion just a bit more. And there's our 16. Let's do our 14. So in this one, we're just going to go down, looking to match like that. Oh no, we didn't put that in the right orientation. So mistakes happen. A couple different things we can try doing. First, let's get that a little wet. The correct thing to do in this case would probably be to just go ahead and recreate this, is what we're ultimately probably going to do. So I'm going to see if we take something like a smooth beveler and just kind of rub that out. We didn't go very deep. All right. Let's let that sit and let some of that water come out of there before we try anything else. Again, we can always come back and recut that piece. And then we needed to do a 20. So our 20 is going to be that orientation. Mistakes happen, just got to fix them. All right, there's our 20. So all of those came out real good. It's our 4 that we goofed that we'll have to take a look at. So now, on any of the rest of these, we just need to punch the single number. And it doesn't matter which direction we do it in, which is nice, until you get to the double digits. There's our 1. These are pretty thin. You might want to watch how hard you hit. I just probably went a little hard on that one. Two. Three. Four. All right, let's see if we can stamp over that 4 that we did before and what it'll look like. So I think we can probably go with this. Get that 1. See if I can't make that 1 just a little deeper, if I can fit it right back in the same hole. That's going to come out all right. By the time we dye that and maybe put a little bit of paint in there, you're not going to know that that was messed up. So good way to fix that. And again, really small piece. If we wanted to, we could have just recut it, but that's going to work. All right. Let's go to 5. Okay, 6 was one of our ones with the holes. We're going to skip it. 7. 8 was one of the ones with the holes, so we're going to go to 9. Now, something we might want to do here. Let's take a look here. Our 9 and our 6 look awfully similar. What we should do is give ourselves a little line under that. I'm just going to take a little beveler. Actually go with my slightly bigger one. And we're just going to bevel a line underneath that. And then let's come over to this one. And do that guy. And so now, sorry, I'm off camera there. Now we've got each marked which direction they want to go. Okay, so now we're looking at 10. Zero. And 1. Let's find our 3, 8, 6, 3. We have already done 14. So we need to do 15. We've already done 16, so we should have 17, 18, 19, and we've already done 20. Let's do this. Let's get one on that one, one on that one, one on that one. And last but not least, 17. All right, let me switch our camera back again. Okay, so now, normally when you're dealing with veg tan, there's a little more work that you should do to prep your leather before we just finish it. So we're gonna need to dye it. We should oil it, and that's actually gonna be the next thing that I'm gonna do is oil the leather. Once that dries, then we'll dye it. I like to oil first because it helps the color kind of spread throughout. If you've got a good oiling on everything, then the dye is not gonna get splotchy. So we're gonna do that. Normally you would do some edge work, and we're gonna be doing a box stitch, which means that these sides are gonna get stitched together like this. So we actually don't want to round those corners over. We wanna leave them square so that they kind of butt up like that. So we're not gonna do anything to those edges. If you want, you could do something to these edges if you wanted to clean them up. We could go through with a small edger and kind of try to knock off some of the ends, and then we could go through and buff them if we want. I don't think we need to in this particular one. This leather's so thin, if we start cutting into it, we might run the risk of tearing. So I don't want to do that. At this point, I think I just want to oil, and we're going to call it at that until we can dye and move on. So let me grab some stuff here to oil with. So we've got Neat's Foot Oil, my oil of choice. And it doesn't take much. We're just gonna, especially again with this leather being so thin, just come through and get that to where it darkens out. Now normally you should probably put down a sheet of paper before you do this. I'm getting oil on my work surface here. We'll want to make sure we take care of that before we do anything else. We don't want to accidentally set down a piece of leather later and get oil on it when we didn't intend to, and have like a splotch of color that is different because one section got oiled and the rest didn't. So there's that. I'm gonna get just a little bit of rubbing alcohol. And we'll actually pull up some of that dye and everything else that I have in there. But I'm gonna let this dry a couple hours. This is one of those things that you don't want to rush. Easy way to ruin a project by rushing ahead and not being patient. So at this point, we want to let this dry a couple hours. Then we're going to go ahead and come back and dye it. After we dye, we'll probably let it sit overnight. And then the next day we'll follow up with putting a top coat on it, maybe some antique to fill in the numbers, and then we'll get together with sewing it. So I'll catch you guys in a few hours. All right, welcome back. We've got the oil dry. We're going to go ahead and dye this. We're going to do a red today. Gloves. Wear gloves. If you weren't aware of this, people are made out of leather, and the leather dye dyes people. Do yourself a favor and wear gloves. I can't count how many times I've thought, oh, this will just be really quick, and then I have purple hands for a day or two. So we're going to glove up. We've got our dye, wool dauber. And so I like working on paper again, so I try not to stain my work surface. We're going to go in and just work back and forth all the different angles to get the all the fibers dyed down. We're going to hit all the edges. We're going to cover the back. And then we're going to set it aside. Dyeing is a whole process that can take a while to get used to, depending on the results that you're looking for, trying to get good even colors. Sometimes depending on the color, the dauber is the best thing to use. I mentioned purple a minute ago. I have found that my airbrush is about the only way to apply the purple I have really well, to where it doesn't come out too dark and it comes out really bright and vibrant. You can use something like black and you can lay that on super thick and it doesn't really matter. Some colors you try to do thick and they're just going to come out too dark. Other ones you try to do thick enough and it just won't matter. They take coat after coat after coat. All we're looking for, like I said, is left to right, top to bottom, some swirls, just to try to get everything in every direction fiber wise. This is something like this bag with all these individual pieces. You're not going to notice too much of a change in the color on it. We're going to end up going in and putting an antique down on this, which is going to darken it some anyway, give us kind of an old blackened look, which is what I'm looking for. So all in all, this is going to work out pretty well. If I had a slightly larger container, we could end up doing a dip dye on these, actually, where you just dunk it in and let it sit. That would work really well in a case like this. But we're just going to work through this way. And like I said, once I get done with this, we're going to want to let this sit completely overnight to dry. And we'll come back tomorrow and get a top coat down and work on that antiquing and then sewing. Try not to overthink it too much when it comes to, like, if you look at this piece here or this one here, you're starting to see some discoloration there already. I wouldn't worry about heading back and hitting that yet. That's just the first part of it starting to dry. If you keep going back over and over and over again, you can end up getting much darker than what you intended to do. Let's go ahead and get, a good solid coat on, let it dry, and see what it looks like tomorrow. And we can see if there's any areas that need to be hit. All right, I've got a little dye left on that dauber. I'm just gonna hit all of these one last time, just so I don't waste the dye. We'll put it in. Again, we were trying to go a little darker on this anyway. All right, we're gonna let this sit overnight and dry, and I will pick back up tomorrow and we'll head to our next steps. Have a good one. Okay, welcome back. We've given the dye overnight to finish. Everything is good and dry. What we're going to do now is put on some satin sheen. You can use whatever top coat you want, but we need to get some sort of a coat on there if we're going to use an antique on this so we have a resist to it. We're still just going to use our wool dauber. And the only thing that's important to know about applying this is instead of all your swirls, you do just want to kind of go in a single direction. This is something that as it dries, you can leave streaks that you see in it. So just lightly, you don't want to go too heavy. It's better to do a couple light coats than it is to do anything as a heavy coat. I will probably stick with a single coat on this, as I'm thinking about using a black antique, and I think I actually want it to darken this red a little bit. So if we don't put quite as much of a resist on, it'll actually pick up a little bit of that antique color. And it all just depends on the look you're going for. If you wanted the red to stay real bright and vibrant, you'd actually want to do a couple extra coats of this here just to help protect that color, or do something different besides the black antique. If we wanted to, a fun technique that I like to use is a neutral antique and a mix paint in with it, and so you can actually end up getting like a gold or a pewter, a silver antique to get down in there. The only caveat with that is if you use any sort of a paint, especially that has like a pearlescence in it, that shine and glitter look will end up on the whole piece, not just inside the number. Some of these numbers are a little shallow too, so they're not going to take the antique super hard. Just kind of one of the things you deal with when you're dealing with thinner leather like this. If we went with a 4 to 5 ounce veg tan, we'd have a lot more play with how deep we embed it and how much we can get down inside there. So we're going to put this on. We're going to give this another couple hours to dry. Again, we don't want to rush this. These are the steps that it takes the time it takes. Good way to ruin a project is by trying to rush past letting your stuff dry and getting things mixed into it, and then it ends up getting muddy and gross, and there's not much you can do about it afterwards. So if you can, and you're making these to like sell, work in batches, get things going to where this can be sitting, you can move on to another one, be punching it out, whatever it takes to kind of keep things moving so you can make multiple of them at a time instead of waiting so long for a single one and then starting another single one. But we'll give that a couple hours. We'll come back and we'll be good to go. All right, our finish is dry. Now we're going to see about putting on some of our antique. Glove it up and take just a little finger, and we're just going to rub that on. Now normally I'd say we try to avoid the holes, but again, this is going to change the color of this black a little bit. So let's get it over more of the piece so that we actually do everything evenly. All right, and so you can see now our 11 stands out. You can see the color difference where it's darkened, and that's what I was looking for. So we're gonna do that, and then we're gonna end up using a black thread on this. In between the two of those, I think that's gonna give us a really, really nice look. So you wanna go a little heavier in the center there just so you can fill in that number, but then just make sure you hit everything else. And this is why we wear a glove. I should have put one on the other hand too, because it'll kind of stain us a little bit. Grab one real quick before we go too much further. If your numbers aren't real deep as you wipe this, it's going to pull a lot of it back out, so just be careful as you come through. And then the trick is going to be, we have to let those dry real good. So this will be another, we're going to do this, and then I'll see you back tomorrow. Now, when we go to sew this, we're going to end up with some of this antique in our thread holes. And because I'm using a black thread, that's going to be fine. If it pulls out, it's just going to stain our black thread more black. If we were wanting to use a white or a cream or something like that, you need to run like a sacrificial bit of thread through, or when you get your thread out and measure how long you're going to have, you need to put a lot of thread at the lead so that as you pull it through, it picks that up instead of what's going to be left. So just wanted to take a look at this particular one here. Here's that 14 that we misstamped earlier. So you can see where the number is still just a little bit underneath that after it's been dyed and finished, where it's evident that we messed up, but that 14 with the antique pops. So again, best solution would have been to remake this piece. If I were making this to sell to somebody, I totally would remake this piece. For this, I think that's a good enough example so that we can see what's going on. Okay, a couple things to notice and compare here. So if we look at like our 4 here, that's a really good deep impression. That stamp was good and set well. Whereas if we look at our 2, that's a little on the light side. The die doesn't take, the antique doesn't take as well in there because it's not as deep. With thin leather, that's something you're really gonna have to pay attention to when stamping, because if you hit too hard, you'll go all the way through the leather, but not hard enough, and you're not gonna get too deep. The thicker the leather you get, the easier that is, because you can really whack it and not have to worry about punching through it. But with stuff, this is 2 to 3 ounce, and I've ripped through that with a stamp before if you're not careful. Now the other thing I wanted to show you here, we've got 2 number 1s. So this is the one that I stamped. Good clean impression. While I've got you close like that, you can see all of that antique that's sitting in those holes. Another thing you can do is you can take a needle and run it through those and help pull that out too. This one is the one that we hand carved, and so I still got the antique in there. You can see that it's a 1, not quite as clean as the stamp in this case, I think, because of how small it is. If it were larger, I think you'd be better off, and the fact that the center of the one still sits high. It's just the edges that we beveled down for the antique to take. This would almost look better if you painted it, so that would be a good option. All right, we're gonna let all of this dry. We really wanna make sure we let that dry overnight so it doesn't rub off onto everything. And we'll pick back up. All right, next, after we've got all of these dry, pay no attention to the blue desktop or blue dye all over my hands or the blue dye that got onto this project. There may have been a bottle of dye that exploded, but we're moving right along. We need to set the eyelets in these. These are 1/4 inch eyelets, so we're gonna pop that in, set this down, get one of our backing pieces here, plop that on. And set an eyelet. Okay, so we got our eyelet set. So if you take a look, I've got 2 different sheets here for you. This one here will show you each number and the numbers that will go next to it, and the orientation at which they'll go next to it. And so that's everything. This guy here kind of gives you the order of how to sew it together that I think makes it the easiest for you. So what we're going to do, we're going to start with 7. We need 1, 15, 5, and 13. 5, 15, 1, and 13. And so we're going to end up just kind of placing these just like I've got in the instructions here, like this. And all of these are going to get sewn together. What I tend to like to do when I sew is, instead of just doing one short run, I like to come down the one side and back up the other, and then I can tie off. And I can come down the side, back up the other, tie off, and then I can do the last one. We are going to be doing a box stitch. I'll zoom in here and show you how to do that. So what we're going to want to do is, these pieces of leather are going to butt up next to each other. We're going to start from the back. We're going to come through with the needles, loop over, and then we'll cross. So let me go ahead and get a different view here, get some needles set up, and I'll show you. All right, let's try this angle and see if this works. So we're going to start off with our needles just like we would a saddle stitch, one on each end. We're going to head through the top here, and this is from the backhand side. We're going to run each needle through and pull it all the way through. Once they are through, we are going to just cross them directly across. And I'll show you here the other side as soon as I do this. Okay. So the reason that we start from the back is that when you cross in the front, we now have 2 threads crossed in the front. We want to have a consistent look the whole way through, and every other one of these is going to have 2 threads that go through the front. So if we start in the back, we can do that. Now the back's going to look slightly different. So from this point, we want to cross and come down 1 hole on the other side. We're going to do the same thing with this one. And so now we have our X in the back, and on the front we've got our 1 double stitch. Now these are going to loop over 1 to each hole, and that's going to give us, again, 2 threads on this side. Now on the box stitch, you can put the X or the straight stitches on the inside or outside. It doesn't matter structurally. It's just a preference on look. And in this case, I wanted the straight across stitches to go on the outside. And we'll do the box inside. I think especially when you do this small pattern, if you do the box on the outside, it ends up getting a little busy. And so now we've got an X, we're back on the inside, flip it around, take a look at this side, and we've got 2 and 2. Now, try to keep consistent as you do this. And so if you look here, the thread that comes from the left to the right, that's the one that's underneath. So we're going to do that first. We're going to go back and hit this guy. Anytime that you can be consistent when you're doing threading, go through the same hole first each time. Anything is going to make your stitch look better. Oh, you want to make sure not to pierce your thread. If you need to, you can pull it to the side. There we go. got about 2 or 3 more stitches on this side, and then we'll head into our next one. Give me just a second. I'm going to finish these out and reorient this so we can see our next one. Okay, so we're coming up this stitch here. I'll show you how to transition into another piece. So we're going to go ahead and finish our last stitch. We go across to over here and come back. And this guy here is going to go across and come back. So now that piece is all sewn on. We're correct from there. So now we're going to take our number 5 and we're going to sew it to our 13. And so we're going to start right here. Now this one that was on the right on the bottom is just going to go ahead and go right through our piece here and come back down through here. So now we've got one string on the other side of this piece. This thread here is going to come through this hole and then come out through the top. And so now we have our 2 threads ready to cross stitch all the way down through this piece until we get to the end. I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera, and I'll show you how to tie that off at the end. Okay, so we've gotten to the end of this stitch and we have a few options now. Let's take a look compared to our layout. So we've got 7, 1, 13, and 5. So that fits right in here. So in the instructions, it's going to tell you the next thing to do is the 15 here, and then put it into the 7 so that we have a full pentagon around. So that's what I would recommend doing. But if you notice, 18 does need to be sewn here. If you wanted to, you're already at the end, you could sew across 18. It's up to you, however you want to do it. First few, I might recommend sticking to the simple groups first, adding them in and then doing it. But we also need to tie off our thread. So at this point, we have 2 pieces of thread over each one. If you wanted to tie off a knot in the back, that would keep your 2 pieces of thread completely across. That's what I did over on this one over here, is just tied off a knot. It'll be inside the bag. You won't ever see it. Normally, I recommend just back stitching a few and then snipping and burning it. And so if we want to do that, we have to give this a couple back stitches, kind of fill the holes in here so that thread can't come out. So we're going to do a couple that way. Take this. We're going to do a couple this way. And how many you do is up to you, and how large your holes are compared to your thread size, compared to how much you put through. Just get that pulled tight. If you pull too tight, your leather will start to bunch. You want to make sure you keep that flat. Okay, and so we can snip that. Burn and mush those off. Now, if you take a look, it's really hard to tell that we looped that up. So while we have 2 on all of these, this one does have more. It's a little thicker. It's really hard to tell, though. And that is a strong joint that you're not going to be able to pull apart. So finish your stitch lines however you want to, whatever you feel comfortable doing. Any of them are going to work. So again, we're going to stick with what I had in the pattern here. We're going to go ahead and do 15 over to 7. We'll sew those together. So let's take a look here. Let's find 15.
12, 18, 19. 12.
So we're going to come down this way and then back up like this to sew that together. And so we're actually going to start to get our first three-dimensional shape there. So I'm going to go ahead and start that stitch and finish it, and then we'll go to the next step. All right, so now we've got our pentagon. The next step is to sew on 19, 17, 12, 18, and 11. And those are going to go just on these pieces here and kind of flare out. So instead of tying this off, I'm just going to transition into our next piece. So we've got 7 here. Let's check our diagram. 7. We want 17. So let's go ahead and grab 17 here. And again, we're going to come over. You can see where that blue dye spilled all over this earlier. Again, if I were making this to sell, I would totally remake that piece. But considering this is kind of dark and muddled anyway, it won't look too terribly bad when we're done. So we're going to go ahead and cross over to this piece and come back over here. And then this one is going to go through that piece, cross over, and now we are ready to again stitch down that line. All right, so we're ready to get that tied off. Now if you wanted to, if you had enough thread, you could skip over to here and around to here and around to here if you want, or take these one at a time. I like to use my cutoff thread that I use from a different piece I sewed for doing these short little runs. Tends to be just the right amount, and then I don't feel like I'm wasting it. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch this off and then head around and do some of these singles, and as soon as I'm done with those, I'll be back and we'll head on to the next piece. All right, we're halfway there. So now we've got our pentagon with a piece on each end, kind of looks like a nice little star here. And so what we're going to do at this point is we're going to set this aside, and we're going to go ahead and sew these pairs of 2s together. Because once we have those pairs of 2 together, they are going to sit in between each of the arms on this. So after we do this stitch here, then we're going to go in and stitch, stitch. After this stitch here, stitch, 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 stitch. And that will cause everything to pull together, and we'll pretty much be done. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch these guys together off camera, and then we'll get together to do some of these stitches. So I'll see you for you. Okay, so we've got all of our 2s sewn together. So now what we're going to do is look for the 10 and 8, this guy right here, and we're going to sew it between the 12 and the 17. So that's going to be this spot right here. So just like all the other box stitches that we did, we start in the back. We want to try to keep those edges nice and tight on all of these as we go. So every time we go through here and we get the needles back on the back side. Ooh, I pierced that thread. So watch, if you ever get a situation like this where you pierce the thread, try to catch it before you pull too much. Otherwise, you can end up where your thread doesn't go all the way through because it knots before it can be pulled tight. That's where you want to watch when you go through the hole to pull the thread out of the way so that you don't stick your needle through it. Okay. So we got that tight. So we're going to take this guy, cross over to the same side. And we're going to take this one, and this is where you want to pull that out of the way so that we can get the needle through. Okay, So that side's good to go. Now we want to hit against the 17 here. So we're going to pull that in. And just like when we did the transitions before, the one that's closest to is going to go ahead and hop over. There we go. Through. And then back across. The one that's furthest away is going to go over one hole into the piece that we're working with now, and then across to the other. And so now we've got our 2 threads going across that side, and we're poking out the back, ready to move on. So again, kind of tug and work as you go to keep these aligned. Okay, so I jumped to that hole accidentally, not that one. Always a good idea to check your work as you go before you sign off. And if you haven't been able to tell throughout this whole video, I make lots of mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. You fix mistakes, you learn from them, and then you move on. All right, so that's going to come over into the correct hole and down. All right, so what we did here, we got all the way down through that side of the 10 and back up through that side, and now we have one of our flaps. And so what we're going to do is we got 4 more of these. We're going to do this one, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one, and then it'll all be done and it'll all fold together, and we'll get to that. So I'm going to go ahead and work on those off camera, and we'll come back right as we're getting together. All right, we're going to get our last stitch in here. We've got all down through the 3, back up. So we're just going to finish this guy off. And through. We'll do a couple back stitches and snip and burn that off. I guess. All right. And that is our D20. So once we get a string inside, it'll all bind up into shape. So I went and cut just a piece of leather lace here. Latigo, I like to use that for these. Paracord works really well too. A lot of people like that because you can do it in different colors. When I sell these at my craft booths, I like to bring some of the paracord that are kind of cut to size in different colors and let people pick out what different colors that they would like them to be. So people can kind of customize them as they go. These have gone over very, very well for me at craft booths. I've sold quite a few of them. Actually, hold on. Let's go inside out. And back in. both of them end up going out the same one. And this can be a tight fit to get through, but that's good because then you don't have to worry about it coming out. All right, and there we are. So now let's be a little critical, take a look at what we've got here. So we know the mistake we made with spilling the die. That was pretty huge on this project. Like I said, if I were going to offer this at one of my booths, I would not leave something like this. We wanted kind of that dark red and black look to go through, which through a lot of it kind of carries over, but then we have just too dark of pieces. So let's brainstorm for a second. If this happened, say we're getting ready for a craft fair, we got a whole bunch of these that we're making, and we didn't want to waste the time that we got started and ended up with a few of these damaged. We could punch replacement pieces. These are pretty small. We make them out of scrap all the time, so that's not going to be a huge waste to miss about 4 triangles. So we could just punch different pieces. We could take and we could dye this whole thing black. If we didn't want to repunch them for any reason, we could have just taken a black dye, put it all over it, and then gone through and painted the numbers so that they stand out. That would have been an option. Other than that, our stamping, some of these look better than others. I think that goes to how thin this leather is. So this is a 2 to 3 ounce. If we were going to stamp this, I think I'd really prefer more on the 3 to 4 or 4 to 5. 5 ounces is getting a little heavy for the little guys, not so bad for the bigger ones. But if we were going to stamp them again, I think I'd want to go with a little bit of a heavier leather to really get a good marking in there. Like that 2 is a little on the thin side. It doesn't take the antique real well. But in general, I think this worked out pretty good. Now these little guys, let's take a look here real quick. They will hold, let's see, we got 1, 2 sets, maybe 3 completely in there. And then this is one of the big ones. So went ahead, and this is one I happened to have on stock. One of the things that I do, if you're interested at all, on the number 1 slot, I put my maker's mark whenever I make these for craft booths. So if you're looking for a place to mark your stuff instead of putting a 1 down, go ahead and put your maker's mark there. This one has been laser etched. So on this one, I went ahead and had the laser cut everything out. I had the laser engrave the numbers, and then I left it just like that. I dyed it, put a finish on it, stitched it. These are quicker to make. Now these will hold about, I think, 6 sets of dice. So if we open this guy up here, and I normally like to tie those off. I didn't tie that off on the other one. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the large ones will hold about 6. These will hold 2 to maybe 3, a couple loose dice between there. I like to include a set of dice when I sell them. I get random ones and just, again, let people pick out what set of dice they want to go with their new bag. And that has gone over very, very well. Now, while I was working on our little guy here, I did go ahead and laser etch and start a set of the big ones so we could take a look at that. The holes on the big ones are just the same. They're the 1/4 inch as well, so we'll get some rivets set in that. But instead of leaving this one laser etched, I thought I'd show you that you can paint them too. So I've got some Angelus bronze. With the blue, I like the bronze or even the gold if it's gonna, wanting something to really stand out. I think that I'll probably use a black thread on this again. I think the bronze darkens it a little bit. If I was using a gold, maybe I'd want to do like a cream or a gold colored thread as well. Let's see, my bronze paint's starting to dry out a little bit, but I think we'll be okay. I do suggest getting a coat of the satin sheen. That's exactly what I put on this. put down one coat before you start painting, and then after you paint, put down another coat. We may end up needing to switch over to our gold. My bronze here is starting to go a little bit. It's congealing. Yeah, I think I'm going to switch gears here. And I'll have to get a replacement for that. I don't know if you can see in there, but that's kind of dried out. This is a really old bottle. We're just going to switch gears to the 18 karat gold. So we will go a little brighter. Maybe we will choose a different thread than the black. Let's start on the 5 here and give that one a chance to dry just a little bit before we put this gold back on top of it. These don't have to be perfect. The deeper that you engrave these, so again, if you use something a little bit thicker on the leather, the paint really just sits down inside the laser etching really well. Otherwise, on something like this one where it's really thin, it's just kind of more of a guide for you to come through as you paint these. Typically I'll do 2 sets, and anything that I hand paint like this I do end up charging extra for because it takes time. And usually that's received pretty well. People understand that. Advertises hand painted, hand sewn, hand cut. All of those things speak to time and labor and quality. So there we go. We're going to let that sit. I'm going to work through all these numbers here, and once I get done, I'll just show you guys what this one looks like completed too. And actually, I can give you a quick sneak peek. This is one that I did that is hand painted, and this is a pattern that I'll have coming out soon, which is for my Mimic D20s. And it's got a little spring loaded inside. The 8 turns into the eyeballs. You got some little teeth. You can paint those white if you want, or leave them same color. But these travel real well. The dice do not fall out of them when they are closed like this. So keep tuned. I will have a video for this one coming up here real soon, and you'll see the patterns online. Thanks again for watching.